Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Nipunika Shahid, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlights India's contribution to fight against COVID in the first session of G20 summit. Also stresses upon One Earth, One Health to fight COVID-19 pandemic. Prime Minister meets presidents of US, France and his counterparts from Britain and Canada on sidelines of G20 summit. Holds discussion with Pope Francis at Vatican on COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. G20 nations endorse India's position on extensive COVID immunization is a global public good, says Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Voting for parliament elections in Japan to take place on Sunday. And in French Open Badminton, PV Sindhu loses to Japan's Sayaka Takahashi in women's singles semi-finals. As India has created history by vaccinating 100 crore people against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not yet over. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. The 16th G20 summit has begun in Rome, Italy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, along with global leaders, is participating in the summit. This year, the summit is centered around the theme People, Planet, Prosperity. The thrust of the summit is on economic and health recovery, climate change and sustainable development. Today's session was on global economy and global health, and it was very significant in view of COVID-19 pandemic. The leaders discussed the global economic and health recovery and way forward. India has been a strong advocate in the G20 for supporting equitable and affordable access to COVID-19 disease control tools, including vaccines and diagnostics, through technology transfer, diversification of supply chains and production hubs. New Delhi has also proposed mutual recognition of COVID-19 vaccine certificate at G20. On the sidelines of the G20 summit, Mr. Modi interacted with various leaders including US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of Canada Justin Trudeau, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. Mr. Modi and French President Macron held a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of G20 summit. The 2 leaders had a productive discussion. Prime Minister's office said India and France are cooperating extensively in various sectors and today's talks will add momentum to the bilateral ties between the 2 nations. Mr. Modi also held a bilateral meeting with his Singaporean counterpart Lee Hsien Loong. Prime Minister's office said the 2 leaders reviewed the full range of the friendly ties between India and Singapore. Briefing media in Rome, Foreign Secretary Harsh Vardhan Shringla said in his intervention at the first session of G20 summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighted India's contribution to fight against COVID. Mr. Shringla said the Prime Minister mentioned India's medical supplies to over 150 countries and spoke about our vision of One Earth, One Health, which is essentially collaborative approach in fight against COVID-19.
The Prime Minister highlighted India's contribution in the fight against the pandemic. He mentioned India's medical supply to over 150 countries. He spoke about our vision of One Earth, One Health, which is essentially the need for a collaborative approach in the international domain in the fight against the corona pandemic. Prime Minister stressed on the need for resilient global supply chains mentioned also India's bold economic reforms, the lowering of the cost of doing business with India. He spoke about innovation in India, the efforts at developing sort of a culture of innovation. He invited the G20 countries to make India their partner in economic recovery and supply chain diversification.
Tomorrow, Mr. Modi will hold bilateral meetings with Prime Minister of Spain and German Chancellor in Rome. Tomorrow's session in the summit will be on climate change and environment and sustainable development.
Prime Minister Modi today met Pope Francis at Vatican City ahead of G20 summit. They discussed the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences for people across the globe. They also discussed the challenge posed by climate change. The Prime Minister briefed the Pope about the ambitious initiatives taken by India in combating climate change, as well as India's success in administering 1 billion COVID-19 vaccination doses. Our correspondent covering the Prime Minister's visit has filed this report.
Pope Francis appreciated India's assistance to countries in need during the COVID-19 pandemic. They discussed a wide range of issues aimed at making the planet better, such as fighting climate change and removing poverty. The meeting, that was scheduled only for 20 minutes, went on for an hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended an invitation to Pope Francis to visit India at an early date, which was accepted with pleasure. This was the first meeting between an Indian Prime Minister and the Pope in more than 2 decades. In June 2000, former Prime Minister late Atal Bihari Vajpayee had last visited the Vatican City and met the then Pope John Paul II. Divakar, AR News, Rome.
India and the Holy See have friendly relations dating back to the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1948. India is home to the second largest Catholic population in Asia. The Prime Minister reached Rome yesterday on a 5-day visit to attend the G20 summit and the World Leaders Summit of COP26 in Glasgow. In today's Hotspot section, we bring to you a discussion on Prime Minister's visit to Italy and the G20 summit. In conversation are Skand Ranjan Tayal, former diplomat, and Manas Pratim Bhuyam, journalist.
The leaders of the G20, a grouping that comprises almost all the leading and powerful economies across the world, today began their 2-day in-person summit in Rome. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Rome to attend the 2-day summit of the G20. Mr. Tayal, what according to you could be the concrete outcome from the crucial G20 in-person summit in Rome that began today?
The 16th G20 summit in Rome today and tomorrow is very, very important, as all the economies of these 20 countries and EU as well as of the world grappling with the post-COVID recovery. And the 20 member countries of G20, they represent 80% of the GDP of the world and more than 75% of trade. And theme of this 2-day summit given by the Italian host Prime Minister Mario Draghi is People, Planet, Prosperity. As far as people are concerned, they are wanting to recover quickly from pandemic, and global health governance has become a major issue because the World Health Organization has not performed as expected to deliver a coordinated and confident solution to the emerging problems, whether it is approval of vaccines, whether it is where COVID-19 virus originated, and the world needs some kind of a vaccine passport, and there are many issues where the countries must work together. Then the second issue is of planet. And planet, we all know global warming and there are extreme weather events. At G20, the major economies and whatever decisions they take will have a great bearing on final outcome of the Glasgow Conference of Parties 26th, which will be from 31 October to 12th of November. And third, of course, is prosperity, because the main purpose of G20 is economic, to ensure economic prosperity of all the countries, economic progress, economic growth, and they will consider many issues in that direction. And another issue which is coming up is the rising crude prices, and that is affecting many countries, including our country, and perhaps this will be discussed. so that the oil producing countries enhance their outputs to control rising crude prices. There we can see some agreement. So the agenda is vast, and the only thing which one can question is that while all the leaders of the major countries are there in Italy, in Rome, President Putin of Russia and President Xi Jinping of China are not there, and they will be addressing the summit by video link. So that perhaps will make the outcome little less unanimous as far as the long-term impact of the decisions of this summit in Rome are concerned.
The inaugural session of the summit actually has already begun, and the inaugural session discussed issues relating to COVID-19 economic recovery and global health infrastructure, how to strengthen the global health infrastructure in the backdrop of the devastating coronavirus pandemic. So 2 days back at a media conference, our Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla said that G20 summit in Rome is expected to come out with a very concrete outcome in combating COVID-19 pandemic and similar challenges in the future. Besides the summit expecting to deliberate on a global health architecture. So what kind of concrete outcome style you expect from the summit being attended by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
There are two major issues in combating COVID-19 globally. One is the vaccine inequality, that whereas the developed economies, they have been able to vaccinate almost their entire population. In many poor countries, the vaccination rate is less than 5%. So the leaders of G20, they have a determination to coordinate their policies so that at least 70% of the world's population is vaccinated by middle of 2022. And second is the global access to COVID control tools. And there we found last year and this year also that supply chains of very essential ingredients to make vaccines, to make medicines, they were disrupted because some countries tried to monopolize the supply of even medicines. So again, there needs to be a little more coordination and more openness so that all these COVID control tools, whether they are preventive or curative, they are available equitably to all the countries of the world.
Second important aspect of the G20 summit is the economic recovery. The pandemic has devastated the world economy. I mean, each and every country across the globe suffered from the pandemic, particularly the economic fallout of the pandemic. So what kind of economic recovery measures that you expect from the summit? And are you just expecting any concrete economic package for the developing countries, poor countries, countries in Africa, which are really hit hard by the pandemic?
The economic recovery and resilient supply chains, resilient manufacturing chains has become very important because of the disruption in supply chains due to COVID-19 restrictions. So there would be some attention paid in that direction, how there can be more flexibility, more resilience in global manufacturing. That is one issue. Second is about the debt that many developing countries in Africa, least developed countries, they have been under the obligation to repay their sovereign debts. And last year, there was a decision to suspend debt repayment to help them out, these countries, so that once their economy recovers, then only they are expected to repay their debts. And I would think that this debt suspension mechanism will be continued for at least one more year by the leaders of G20.
So one more topic which is being talked about is to minimize the corporate tax. There is a proposal that G20 leaders are expected to formally affirm their commitment to establish a 15% global minimum corporate tax rate by 2023. Can we expect some kind of movement on the issue?
Yes, the reports from Italy are that already in the summit, the leaders have decided that there will be a global minimum tax of 15%. Because as we know, most of these very big corporations, they have enormous profits, but they do not pay any tax, and they hide their taxes in countries where there is zero tax. So the governments or countries where they actually make their profit, they do not gain any tax revenue from these companies. whether it is Google, Amazon, Facebook, they all hide their taxes in Ireland and many other countries where the tax rate is very low. So this is a very good decision. It seems has already been taken today at the G20 summit in Rome that no country or territory like this Marshall Island and Virgin Island and all that, they cannot have a corporate tax level of less than 15%.
What kind of deliberations you are expecting at the G20 on the climate change? Definitely, major decisions will be taken at the Glasgow summit, the COP26 summit. But G20 is also expected to deliberate extensively on the challenges of climate change, which has been impacting a number of countries globally. And this has now emerged as one of the biggest global challenges. So what kind of discussions and what kind of outcome you expect from the G20 in the context of the climate change?
Whatever consensus is reached among the G20 leaders today and tomorrow will have a great bearing on the final outcome of the Glasgow Conference of Parties 26. The main issues which are before Glasgow Conference, besides many other issues, are the net zero target of carbon emissions, whether it should be to a specific year. More than 120 countries are perhaps already announced that they will have net zero carbon emission by 2050. There is a lot of pressure on India also to announce that. China has announced that they will have net zero emission by 2060. So there can be some discussion on that. And the second very important factor is that how does one finance the shift from high carbon energy and technology to low carbon or zero carbon technology. In the Paris Agreement 2015, the rich countries had agreed to transfer $100 billion per year to developing countries to facilitate development of technology and transfer of technology for greener industry. But that target has not been met. So perhaps there will be some discussion on how to finance the developing countries so that they can also move from high carbon energy consumption and technology to low carbon energy and technology.
But at the same time, on the eve of the G20 summit, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned that the Glasgow meeting risked the failure over the still tepid commitments from big polluters and various other countries. How do you see the UN Secretary General's warning that if G20 leaders fail to announce significant and concrete plan to reduce carbon emission, then the COP26 has a risk not coming out with any concrete plan to tackle climate change?
UN Secretary General has given a warning, but all of the leaders and the people have to be conscious and to accept that no country would adopt any policy which affects their development, their economic growth, and most of the developing countries still need a lot of energy to bring their populations out of poverty. So the way out is what India is proposing, International Solar Alliance and more non-conventional energy, more and more renewable energy and less use of fossil fuels. And in that, a very great possibility is with green hydrogen. So there should be enormous effort by all the countries of the world to develop these new technologies and to make them scalable and to make them available at very affordable rates to all the world. See, it is very easy to set targets, but one has to move towards those targets, and these targets can be achieved by use of technology, not by forcing some of the countries to reduce their emissions at the cost of the development of their people.
Our Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he has been calling for a united global approach to deal with these three challenges, in fact, global economic recovery, to deal with climate change, and to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. So do you see any concrete outcome in the context of these challenges that the world is facing today, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's constant pitching for an united global approach to deal with these challenges?
These challenges are global in nature, and it is very right that Prime Minister Modi is advocating a unified approach, a collective approach, an approach where all the countries of the world, at least all the major economies, work together with identifiable objectives, achievable goals, and some kind of a roadmap on how to reach there. It is not easy. Every country has its own national interest. Every country is sovereign. Every country has its own perception of what is the problem and how to deal with the problem. But the forums like G20, like Glasgow Conference of Parties, like United Nations, their objective is, their purpose is to harmonize these national positions for the global good and in the interest of the planet. So let us see what the outcome is. But again, I would say that since the President of China, Xi Jinping, and President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, are not physically present in Italy, some kind of a global consensus on important issues may be difficult to achieve.
Terrorism is also a major challenge facing the world, and India has been at the receiving end of the global menace. So do you think the G20 leaders will have some kind of discussions on tackling this very crucial and important global challenge?
Group of G20 members have always taken a very strong stand, which is reflected in Pakistan's being on the grey list in the Financial Action Task Force, which is watchdog body to look at terror financing in which countries are more active. So that will continue. On Afghanistan, it is important, as Prime Minister Modi has said, that all the major countries should have a united approach, because financing of lifting of sanctions over the Taliban government in Afghanistan is one issue on which countries have to work together. There will be some discussion in Italy in the G20 summit.
Thank you, Mr. Scantil.
Thank you very much.
Commerce Minister and India's G20 Sherpa Piyush Goyal has said that G20 nations have endorsed India's position that extensive COVID immunization is a global public good. Briefing the media during the meeting of G20 Sherpas in Rome, Mr. Goyal said the agenda of the meeting so far have included several important interventions from India.
The G20 nations have endorsed India's position that extensive COVID-19 immunization is a global public good. I'm also happy to share with you that we got tremendous support from the G20 nations for our suggestion on mutual recognition of travel documents, including testing and vaccine certificates.
World Health Organization chief has appealed to G20 leaders to fund a $23.4 billion plan to bring COVID-19 vaccines, tests and drugs to poorer countries in the next 12 months. WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, speaking ahead of the G20 meet in Rome, said the group has the political and financial power needed to end the pandemic by funding the plan. He said doing so could potentially save 5 million lives.
In a global crisis, there is no substitute for science, solutions, and solidarity. The immediate challenge we face now is to end the acute phase of the pandemic, including by ensuring equitable access to vaccines.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Power Ministry has said that India is committed to achieve more than 40% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel energy resources by 2030. The ministry said government has identified new areas to achieve higher levels of penetration of renewable energy by proposing certain amendments to Energy Conservation Act 2001. The objective of this amendment is to enhance demand for renewable energy at the end-use sectors such as industry, buildings and transport. The ministry has prepared amendments after consultations with stakeholders. The proposal includes defining minimum share of renewable energy in the overall consumption by the industrial units or any establishment. There will be provision to incentivize efforts on using clean energy sources by means of carbon saving certificate. The proposed amendments will facilitate development of carbon market in India and prescribe minimum consumption of renewable energy either as direct consumption or indirect use through grid. This will also help in reduction of fossil fuel-based energy consumption and carbon emission to the atmosphere. In Japan, people will vote tomorrow in parliamentary polls with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's party fighting to save its majority in the lower house. The polls come at a time when the country is debating the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic as well as worsening economic inequality. Japan's parliament has already been dissolved ahead of tomorrow's vote. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party (LDP) had 276 seats in the 465-member chamber, while its coalition partner Komeito had 229. Most opinion polls are projecting that the LDP will retain power, albeit with a reduced number of seats.
Microsoft stocks become world's most valuable after its shares rose as much as 1.1% to hit a market value of $2.46 trillion, blowing past Apple this week. The drop in Apple Incorporation's shares yesterday propelled Microsoft Corporation to the position of the world's largest listed company by market capitalization. Apple fell as much as 3.9% to $146.65 after reporting fourth quarter revenue that came in below the average analyst estimate, which gave the iPhone maker a market value of $2.41 trillion. In French Open Badminton Tournament, Indian shuttler PV Sindhu lost to Japan's Sayaka Takahashi 21-18, 16-21, 12-21 in the semi-final of the women's singles in Paris. The two-time Olympic medalist PV Sindhu was the last remaining Indian badminton player at the BWF World Tour event.
In ICC Men's T20 Cricket World Cup, England crushed Australia by 8 wickets at Dubai International Stadium today. Chasing a paltry target of 126 for victory, England reached the target by losing only 2 wickets with 50 balls to spare. Opening batsman Jos Buttler smashed an unbeaten 71, while Chris Jordan picked up 3 wickets for England. Earlier put into bat, Australia were bundled out for 125 in stipulated 20 overs. Tomorrow, India will take on New Zealand in Dubai International Stadium at 7:30 p.m. Prior to this, Afghanistan will face Namibia in Sheikh Zayed Stadium, Abu Dhabi at 3:30 p.m. Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian says COP26 failure could mean mass immigration and food shortages, says Boris Johnson. The Globe and Mail reports G20 summit opens with call for more COVID-19 vaccines for poor countries. The Washington Post writes, Turkey moves to deport Syrian migrants for eating bananas in a provocative way on TikTok. Financial Times reports Saudi Arabia bans Lebanese imports and expels ambassador. Wall Street Journal says Sudanese pro-democracy protesters march in defiance of military coup.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlights India's contribution to fight against COVID in the first session of G20 summit. Also stresses upon One Earth, One Health to fight COVID-19 pandemic. Prime Minister meets presidents of US, France and his counterparts from Britain and Canada on sidelines of G20 summit. Holds discussion with Pope Francis at Vatican on COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. G20 nations endorse India's position on extensive COVID immunization is a global public good, says Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Voting for parliament elections in Japan to take place on Sunday. And in French Open Badminton, PV Sindhu loses to Japan's Sayaka Takahashi in women's singles semi-finals.